Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Michael Fillios, founder and CEO of IT Ally and a CDO editorial board member. And we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT, CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Lorraine Waters, Chief Data Officer at Solidatus. Lorraine, welcome to the show.
Michael, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
A couple of examples of the interactions within the technology organization, let's say the CIO, or in some cases, another CDO might be the chief digital officer, pardon me. So there's lots of different folks now that are overlapping, I would say. Maybe you can help us understand a little bit more about not only those interactions with the C-suite, but maybe with some of your peers that might be in tech or tech-centric roles in the company.
Well, a couple of years ago, there were a lot of conversations around should the chief data officer also be the chief analytics officer? Should the chief data officer also be the chief digital officer? I see, them as distinct roles, but they are just additional shoulders to the wheel. The chief data officer can work perfectly well supporting and servicing, digital transformation and analytics capabilities, whether it sits in the CDO's world or under another C-suite level. It doesn't really matter, but they do need to work in concert together. And it's the chief data officer's role to make the data as accessible as possible to the analytics and digital teams, safely, making sure that the right permissions are in place, the right rules are being followed in who can see and who can transport data. So it's definitely a partnership between those roles.
Yeah, you just touched upon what I would consider another touch point is the security officer, or perhaps the person that's responsible or function that's responsible for this. And it's hard to talk about data without talking about security, especially in this day and age. I wonder if you have some perspectives on that in your current or former roles.
There are not a lot of CDOs that also have responsibility for the CISO role, the Chief Information Security Officer. It is typically more of a technical role, and the defenses that an organization need to put in place are quite specialized. But the more that a Chief Data Officer can do to ensure that there is a good understanding of how the data flows through the organization, end to end, left to right, having that blueprint of data for your organization really helps the CISO to understand where the most critical data is, where it's flowing to, and what controls are or are not in place. So the Chief Data Officer is key to the success of the Chief Information Security Officer. And, again, they're usually very closely linked in any organization.
Very true. So I know not all CDOs are created equal, just like other technologists are created equal. But when you think about the attributes and the skills of today's modern CDO, what comes to mind for you? How would you characterize a contemporary CDO?
Well, I would say this, but having a business management mindset will definitely help. A very practical and commercial focus with, product management skills. I think that's really important. Data services needs to be as commercial as possible. I think the importance of managing data privacy, and data ethics, which increasingly falls under the Chief Data Officer's remit, is also very helpful. So a knowledge of privacy law, and even a knowledge of philosophy for the ethics part of things is really good. And I also think you need a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. To obviously develop the data culture and to develop the talent pool around data management, but also to have different perspectives and to be able to protect, the data related to people and, various subjects. So that's really important as well, a strong commitment to DEI.
That's a lot. That's a tall order to have as skill sets, but I understand why you're referencing all those different dimensions. And in a lot of ways, again, I think it parallels the CIO and how they have evolved, although the CDO is rapidly evolving a lot faster than let's say 3 decades of chief information officers. Part of your role, you mentioned a couple of times at Solidatus, being in a different capacity, is this notion of commercialization of data. And I'm just wondering if you can put a little bit of context around that, around the commercialization of data. I mean, in a financial institution, that might be one thing. And what Solidatus does, maybe you can give some context around that.
Yeah, and I think good data management or even bad data management leading to data quality issues has been a tax on the business, and it is often seen by other C-suites as, a cause of the problem rather than a solution. So I think the CDO needs to help to change that view of data management. It's an advantage to have an effective data management capability, and it's up to the CDO to market that capability in as a commercial way as possible, to show the benefits of managing data better. And one of the tools in the CDO's toolbox is, as I say, to create that blueprint of data. What data comes in, so categorize it, catalog it, where it flows to, creating that blueprint, that data lineage across the whole organization, being able to overlay where the controls are to manage the flow of data and the quality of the data at each of the key control points, and being able to report to various stakeholders, various consumers and producers of data, the quality of the commodity that the users want to use. So I think that's some of the things that the CDO needs to do practically to keep a service mentality around data management.
Okay, and if I may, just to follow up, because this area intrigues me a little bit, again, because of some of the parallels with just technology leadership in general. I'm getting the sense that you're maybe discussing data management from more of a internal perspective as it relates to commercialization. But are there examples that you've experienced where now there's an external commercialization of this data, which might, bring on new revenue streams or other areas, and of course, invoke all kinds of things around privacy and ethics, as you pointed out earlier. So I do like to separate these two in terms of marketing internally, what good data management is versus that might influence your business model as an asset.
There have been many attempts to commercialize data and make data available from various organizations, not just financial services. And, some of them have failed, some of them have succeeded. There's also been many conversations started around utilities for data. More often than not, they have failed. I think data is a very precious commodity and people are reluctant to share. Sometimes that's because of the sensitivity of the data. Sometimes it's because of the poor quality of the data. They don't want to expose that to the outside world. So it's very difficult to create that argument for, commercializing and selling data. Customers don't want their suppliers to package and sell on their data. And we're seeing individuals becoming a lot more aware of how they can and how they can exercise their rights over the transmission of the data or the onward distribution of the data. So, a lot of those opportunities for commercialization have been shut down. I do think there is more to do around sharing and developing standards across the industry for data, which I think we are hearing a lot more of, particularly around ESG data, interestingly. Mm-hmm. So there are so many different standards out there that people are looking at how they can create common or global standards around this. Some of the industry bodies are doing it. Some of the organizations themselves are doing it amongst themselves. But I think there's more to do there, and there's so little time around ESG and the commitments that have been made that I think the industry is going to have to come together to look at standardization.
We did a recent interview with a former colleague of mine who's involved in the World Economic Forum and some of the G2 and others, like you said. And these are organizations that are taking a more aggressive stance on trying to create some of these standards, whether it's for ESG or in some cases you mentioned to support data ethics or the democratization of data, right? Where
yes,
consumers are now putting that control in the consumer's hands. I wonder if we can shift gears. I know your extensive career is focused predominantly on larger organizations. One of the roles that I play with CDO magazine is representing small and mid-sized businesses, or perhaps on your side of the pond, it's small and medium enterprises or SMEs. But I'm wondering if you can provide some context for our small businesses that are listening in on this in terms of how can they think about data analytics, at a smaller organization, and what kind of leadership, would a company of that size be looking at to help get them going on this journey when they perhaps are limited with resources, financial or otherwise, but still can benefit from this great technology and the value that data presents to an organization?
I think, and I have worked in smaller organizations as well, particularly when I was, consulting after I left RBS and before I joined HSBC. So I totally get that you don't always have enough people around the table to kind of work through the challenges that the big organizations have already solved or have already invested in to solve. And of course, Solidatus is not a huge organization. We're 100 people, but we are a data company with a lot of data people. So we can put our heads together to solve the various challenges. But for a small organization that's starting out on their data strategy journey, there are some excellent industry bodies out there that they can research what good looks like, and I would look at the EDM Council's data capability assessment matrix, DCAM. I would look at DARMA and DMBOK, which gives you all of the components that you need to set up a successful data strategy. Not every organization is going to follow every single step on the wheel, and not every organization is going to want to get to the optimal level of efficiency in the maturity scale, but you can get some really good tips and hints on what to focus on first: creating your data framework, creating the principles that you want to adhere to as part of that framework, and how to regularly assess yourself to make sure that you are making progress against it. Data is not difficult to understand, once you've got that basic foundational knowledge. So, that would be where I would encourage people to start. Have a look at the frameworks. They're very accessible, and see what relates most to your industry and your organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I know working with C-suite members of small businesses, you pointed out this whole notion of being outcome driven. I think this is another way to connect, perhaps the academic side of frameworks and such to real business outcomes. And I think it's certainly in our experience that many companies are wanting to leverage their data more for various things. But just have a difficult time perhaps. And then worse tendency is to then just go buy a tool and basically just think that a tool is going to solve the problem, which I'm sure you agree doesn't necessarily do.
No, absolutely not. And that might sound strange coming from within a software company, but I would agree with you. You need to understand what is the business strategy and what will help you to achieve your business goals, your business outcomes, and how fast can you achieve them? Not cutting corners, but delivering incremental business benefits along the way. People just don't have time or money to spend years identifying critical data elements, putting in place policies, etc.
Right.
You've got to be dropping in incremental business benefits, which then buys you the time to develop that longer term strategy and to implement it. So, and that's definitely where I see the benefits of having a very practical, commercially minded CDO.
Yeah, perhaps it plays to an advantage for a small business to have that mindset. And like yourself, having been in large companies also, sometimes large companies get paralyzed and work so much on the master data, the governance, and some of the non-sexy things that never produce any output. And that frustrates C-suite as well.
Absolutely. And, I think in the early days of CDOs, they focused too much on,
Right.
The setting up the perfect data governance function. I'm 80-20 all the way. Let's make sure that we have the right controls in place, etc. But we're here to deliver the business strategy and the business benefits.
So being in this field for as long as you've had, I'm sure you faced some challenges, and perhaps in the role of CDO, but just being an executive inside of large global companies. Perhaps you can give some examples of some of those challenges that you faced, and what was your thought process in terms of solving them?
Well, there have been so many. I have worked for quite a few banks now, and in various roles, but I have been at a few banks that were subject, unfortunately, to enforcement action by regulators.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, and one in particular, sticks in my mind. The regulator was most concerned about two things. One of them was data, and I was asked by my boss to make sure that data wasn't the thing that kept us in, under this enforcement action.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this unfortunately meant that I had to focus on what the regulator wanted me to focus on. And, in those days, the regulator used to ask you, how many CDEs do you have under governance? What kind of coverage do you have for data quality tests? And that really wasn't where I wanted to focus my efforts. Again, that's very reactive. Detective controls, picking up when the mistake has already happened. I would much rather have focused on the preventive, start at the beginning, start to create your data lineage as you discover your data and how it flows. Where are my control weaknesses? And fix them as you find them, where you find them. That's the right way to do things. But, I was being asked to focus much more on the detective. So it was quite a frustrating time. And, I think what I had to put in place was not as sustainable as I would have liked.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a time pressure that I had to make. They were very happy with the outcome. And, at one point they called us industry leading. But I didn't feel industry leading. I would have much preferred to focus on the preventive. So that was one frustration that I had. But I had to say, the regulators are definitely coming along on this journey, and they are actually some of the biggest data collection points. Because obviously they're getting all of the reporting and the data and disclosures from financial services companies. So I think they're coming to the same conclusions that we are, that you can't keep doing it the same way on that hamster wheel, detecting, remediating. You have to put in place much more proactive and preventive and sustainable controls.
Terrific. Well, Lorraine, thank you so much for joining me today, and congratulations.
You're welcome.
On the success of your career, with more to come, I know for sure. And for those of you that want to learn more about CDO Magazine or to view more of our interviews, please visit cdomagazine.tech. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Take care.
My pleasure.